Coordinates confirmed. Firing now. Incoming! Get down! Shells, take cover! Medic!
January 17th, 1944. The first light of dawn creeps over a jagged, volcanic ridge in the Mariana Islands. A thin mist clings to the palms and craggy outcrops, carrying the scent of salt and smoke. Japanese infantry huddle in shallow foxholes, their rifles slung over shoulders, faces etched with fatigue and anticipation. Somewhere to the east, the low rumble of engines signals the arrival of U.S. artillery units. Without warning, a thunderous roar breaks the fragile calm. Shells scream through the sky, each impact sending plumes of earth and fire into the air. The ground shakes, splintering trees and scattering birds. Japanese soldiers freeze, the horizon suddenly transformed into a moving wall of destruction. Their careful defensive formations collapse under the relentless pressure. From behind, American artillery crews advance in unison, their cannons spitting precise, coordinated fire. Each barrage rolls forward, methodical, unstoppable, a mechanical tide designed to crush resistance before infantry ever reaches it. For the men in the trenches, there is no hiding from the walls of steel and fire. Shock and disbelief ripple through their ranks as the battlefield itself seems to turn against them. The stage is set. A clash of human resolve and technological force will unfold, shaping not only this island, but the very nature of warfare in the Pacific. By early 1944, the Pacific War had reached a crucial juncture. The Japanese Empire, once expanding rapidly across Southeast Asia and the Pacific, was beginning to feel the tightening grip of American and Allied forces. The fall of Guadalcanal in 1943 had marked the first significant setback for Japan in the Pacific, demonstrating that their island defenses, though carefully fortified, were not invincible. Across the vast stretches of ocean, the United States Navy and Marine Corps had developed a methodical strategy: island hopping. Each captured position would serve as a staging ground for the next assault, bringing the Allied forces ever closer to the Japanese homeland. The Mariana Islands, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, were pivotal in this campaign. Strategically located, they offered airfields within bombing range of Japan itself. For the Japanese High Command, their defense was critical, and they had invested heavily in fortifications. Every ridge, cave, and beach was prepared to resist assault. Trenches, bunkers, and concealed artillery positions turned the islands into almost natural fortresses. Japanese infantry were drilled to hold positions at all costs, with orders that emphasized loyalty, sacrifice, and unwavering resistance. For many soldiers, defeat was not an option. Retreat or surrender was seen as dishonorable, even fatal. Across the ocean, the Americans were reorganizing their approach to assaulting fortified islands. Previous battles had taught painful lessons. Frontal attacks against entrenched defenders often resulted in heavy casualties. On Tarawa and Guadalcanal, infantry had been decimated by prepared defensive fire. Engineers, tacticians, and artillery officers began to develop a new method that would combine overwhelming firepower with precise coordination: the rolling artillery barrage. Rather than relying solely on infantry assaults or aerial bombardments, artillery could advance in calculated increments, softening enemy positions just ahead of the advancing troops. This was not merely a matter of dropping shells indiscriminately. It required careful planning, detailed maps, and precise timing. Artillery units would be synchronized with infantry movements, each shell targeting specific defensive positions. Every hilltop, bunker, and trench was cataloged, allowing American gunners to anticipate Japanese maneuvers and suppress them before they could respond. Forward observers, Marine officers, and Army spotters would risk exposure to relay real-time data to the firing units, ensuring that every shell landed exactly where it was needed. The rolling barrage introduced a psychological component that was as important as the physical destruction it caused. Japanese soldiers, trained to stand their ground, now faced an invisible, unstoppable wall of fire. No defensive position was safe. What had once been perceived as solid earth, a sanctuary in the chaos of battle, could now be reduced to rubble in seconds. Fear spread quickly, but so too did confusion. Communication lines, already fragile in the heat of battle, were shredded by the relentless artillery, leaving commanders struggling to coordinate countermeasures. For the American troops, this tactic represented a significant evolution in combined arms warfare. Infantry would no longer be exposed to the initial volleys of enemy fire as they approached enemy lines. Artillery had become an extension of their bodies, a moving shield that advanced with them across the battlefield. The psychological effect on Japanese defenders was immediate. Even the most disciplined infantrymen hesitated, sensing the inevitability of the assault. By January 1944, all of these elements were converging on the Marianas. The Americans had staged thousands of tons of artillery, from 105mm howitzers to heavier 155mm guns, on landing beaches and nearby ships. Marines and Army units were briefed extensively on the timing and coordination required to keep the rolling barrage moving in perfect synchrony with infantry advances. On the Japanese side, defensive positions were reinforced, but there was little understanding of the methodical firepower that would soon descend upon them. Officers could prepare their men for air attacks or naval bombardments, but a coordinated rolling artillery wall was unprecedented. The stage was set for a collision of discipline and innovation. On one side, soldiers trained to die in place, holding ground at all costs. On the other, a methodical application of science, timing, and firepower designed to break the will of even the most steadfast defenders. It was a war not only of courage but of adaptation, where technological evolution met human resolve. As dawn approached on the day of the assault, both sides braced for what was to come. The Japanese infantry, alert and tense, scanned the horizon for signs of attack. Across the beaches, artillery crews checked calculations, plotted coordinates, and adjusted for wind, elevation, and distance. Soon, the first shells would scream through the sky. Soon, the rolling walls of destruction would begin to move forward. And with them, the nature of battle in the Pacific would be forever transformed. The day before the assault, the islands were deceptively quiet. From a distance, the palms swayed gently in the ocean breeze, and waves lapped softly against the coral-strewn shores. Yet beneath this calm, both sides were locked in invisible, meticulous preparation. For the Americans, success depended not only on firepower, but on flawless coordination. Every gun, every shell, every observer had a role in the precise execution of the rolling barrage. Maps were marked with the locations of Japanese bunkers, artillery positions, and trench networks. Reconnaissance planes had flown countless hours over the islands, photographing and recording terrain features that would guide gunners during the assault. On the beaches, artillery crews labored in near silence, moving heavy 105mm and 155mm guns into firing positions under the cover of darkness. Ammunition was stockpiled in careful rows, and spotters tested their instruments to ensure accuracy. Every calculation mattered. Range, trajectory, wind, humidity, and elevation had to be accounted for. One misstep could mean shells falling short on advancing Marines, or overshooting and wasting the element of surprise. Engineers reinforced temporary positions, camouflaging them from Japanese observation while ensuring that guns could shift forward as the barrage progressed. Meanwhile, Japanese commanders maintained an atmosphere of stoic readiness. Officers drilled their men, emphasizing discipline and the importance of holding positions. Soldiers carried extra ammunition, reinforced shelters, and rations to last what they expected to be a prolonged defense. Observation posts scanned the horizon for signs of approaching ships or planes, but there was no knowledge of the impending rolling artillery tactic. Previous engagements had taught them to expect bombardment from the sea or the sky, yet the systematic, moving wall of artillery that would now approach was outside their experience. As dawn broke, subtle cues indicated the approaching assault. Ships offshore shifted into position, and the distant rumble of engines hinted at the coordinated advance of artillery units. For the Japanese infantry, uncertainty began to mingle with resolve. They had trained to withstand bombardment, but the synchronized movement of fire across the terrain was something entirely different. The ground that had seemed firm beneath their feet could now erupt in flames and smoke at any moment. Trenches that had been painstakingly dug were no longer safe havens. They could be obliterated in minutes. The Americans had devised a rolling artillery to exploit exactly this vulnerability. It was a system in which barges moved forward in carefully timed increments, maintaining a constant pressure on defenders while keeping friendly infantry just behind the lethal wave of fire. No single position could survive unscathed. Japanese soldiers faced a relentless, almost mechanical force that combined observation, mathematics, and precision. For the men in foxholes, the advancing barrage created the sensation of an invisible wall crushing everything in its path, leaving only fear and confusion in its wake. Logistics played a crucial role in this innovation. Moving hundreds of tons of artillery across beaches strewn with coral and sand required engineers, trucks, and manpower. Crews worked at night to avoid detection, laying temporary tracks and clearing paths through dense foliage. Every battery was synchronized to fire in sequence, creating the illusion of a living, breathing weapon that advanced inexorably toward the enemy lines. Artillery officers coordinated with infantry commanders via radio, ensuring that the rolling barrage did not outpace the troops it was meant to protect. The precision required was staggering, yet the Americans understood that the success of their campaign depended on it. For the Japanese defenders, the psychological effect of anticipation was already taking its toll. Even before the first shell struck, the presence of American forces on the horizon weighed heavily. Officers attempted to rally morale, but uncertainty gnawed at the ranks. The Japanese had relied on the strength of natural terrain and disciplined formations to resist assaults, yet the methodical preparation of their adversaries suggested that these advantages might be insufficient. The unknown, the sound of engines in the distance, the sight of artillery pieces lining the shore, created a sense of impending doom. At the same time, American infantry were briefed meticulously on what lay ahead. They would follow the rolling barrage in tightly coordinated waves, staying close enough to benefit from its suppression of enemy positions while avoiding friendly fire. Every Marine and Army soldier understood that timing and discipline were paramount. Too fast, and they risked walking into their own bombardment. Too slow, and they allowed Japanese forces to regroup. The rolling artillery was not just a weapon. It was a guide, a force that shaped the movement and momentum of the infantry. By midday, both sides were poised for confrontation. The Americans had perfected their coordination, tested their calculations, and prepared for every contingency. The Japanese defenders, though resolute, remained largely unaware of the innovation that would soon strike them with devastating effect. Every element, terrain, technology, timing, and human determination, was aligned for a collision that would reshape the battle. In the coming hours, the first shells would scream across the horizon. The rolling walls of artillery would move forward, unstoppable and precise. Japanese infantry would find their defenses shattered, their expectations overturned, and their courage tested in ways they had never imagined. The stage was fully set for a dramatic and decisive clash, where discipline, technology, and human endurance would collide in a storm of fire and steel. For the Japanese infantry, the first hours of the rolling artillery barrage were incomprehensible. Men who had spent months, even years, preparing to hold their positions now found the very ground beneath them exploding in fire and smoke. The sound was deafening, shells screaming through the air, striking in rapid succession, shaking the earth as if it were alive. Dust and debris filled the trenches, mixing with the acrid scent of gunpowder. Men covered their faces, instinctively pressing their helmets against their ears, yet there was little protection against the intensity of the bombardment. Confusion spread quickly. Soldiers trained to follow orders and maintain formation now found themselves isolated, unable to communicate with nearby comrades. The synchronized movement of artillery meant that no single position was safe for long. One moment a trench seemed intact, the next, it was leveled in a plume of smoke. Fear and adrenaline mingled, sharpening senses but also paralyzing some. Many soldiers later recounted a sense of unreality, as though the earth itself had turned against them. Some clutched their rifles, waiting for orders that never came. Others abandoned positions entirely, seeking cover wherever they could find it. Yet within the chaos, moments of discipline emerged. Officers shouted commands above the din, rallying small groups to return fire, reposition, or hold until reinforcements could arrive. Despite exhaustion and terror, many Japanese soldiers displayed unwavering resolve, rooted in their training and the belief that retreat was dishonorable. These human responses, fear, courage, confusion, were magnified by the relentless precision of the artillery, a force that seemed designed to exploit both physical vulnerability and psychological limits. At every level, commanders faced a staggering challenge. American officers had to execute a meticulously timed assault, coordinating infantry, artillery, and logistical support across difficult terrain. Each battery had to fire in sequence, ensuring that the rolling barrage moved forward precisely in tandem with advancing troops. A single miscalculation could result in catastrophic friendly fire incidents, or give the Japanese defenders a moment to regroup and counterattack. The Japanese leadership, in contrast, was grappling with unprecedented stress. Divisional and regimental commanders attempted to anticipate the tactics of an enemy they had never encountered in such a systematic form. Traditional strategies, fortifying high ground, using machine gun nests, employing counter-artillery tactics, were rendered largely ineffective by the speed and coordination of the rolling barrage. Orders were transmitted through runners and limited radio communication, but the devastation of key positions often severed lines of command. Some officers, understanding the overwhelming odds, attempted small tactical withdrawals to secondary positions, though this went against strict defensive doctrine. Leadership under these conditions required both strategic insight and adaptability. On the American side, officers constantly adjusted fire coordinates in response to observations, maintaining the momentum of the barrage without endangering their own forces. The ability to coordinate across multiple batteries and different units was a testament to rigorous training and logistical planning. On the Japanese side, leadership was tested not only tactically but morally, as commanders had to maintain morale among troops facing what seemed an unstoppable force. From the perspective of the Japanese high command, the rolling artillery represented an entirely new dimension of warfare. Defenders had prepared for naval bombardments and air raids, But the creeping, methodical wall of fire advancing across the terrain was unlike anything in prior encounters. Bunkers and fortifications, which had previously offered some security against shelling, were quickly overwhelmed. Even deep caves and reinforced positions could not withstand the continuous pressure. Soldiers on the front lines experienced the barrage as a living threat. Some described the ground as moving, as if the artillery were a tidal wave sweeping forward, leaving destruction in its wake. Defensive strategy became reactive rather than proactive. Japanese units attempted to counteract the advance by firing sporadically from hidden positions, but these efforts were often neutralized by the precision and timing of the American bombardment. Communication breakdowns compounded the problem, isolating units and preventing coordinated counterattacks. The enemy perspective highlights both vulnerability and resilience. While the rolling artillery inflicted physical devastation, it also inflicted psychological strain, eroding confidence in long-established defensive methods. The Japanese forces faced not only a technologically superior opponent, but a style of warfare that challenged their very instincts. Yet even amid fear and confusion, many soldiers adhered to the principles instilled in them: honor, discipline, and the belief that every inch of ground must be contested. This tension between overwhelming firepower and steadfast human resolve defined the early hours of the assault and would shape the unfolding battle. The human, leadership, and enemy angles together illustrate the complex interplay of psychology, strategy, and technology in the Pacific War. Soldiers felt the terror and chaos of the bombardment firsthand. Commanders navigated logistical and tactical challenges under extreme pressure. Defenders confronted a form of warfare that disrupted traditional doctrines. These perspectives set the stage for the next phase, exploring technological and tactical innovations and the moral implications of an assault designed to overwhelm both mind and body. The rolling artillery barrage represented a breakthrough in military technology and battlefield application. Previously, artillery had been used in static bombardments, where guns fired from fixed positions in preparation for infantry assaults. But the Pacific Islands presented unique challenges: dense foliage, steep ridges, and well-fortified Japanese positions made conventional shelling ineffective. The solution was both simple in concept and complex in execution: a moving, coordinated wall of fire that advanced in lockstep with troops. American gunners relied on sophisticated calculations, accounting for elevation, wind, and distance to ensure that each shell landed precisely on its target. Maps were meticulously detailed, indicating the location of every Japanese trench, machine gun nest, and bunker. Forward observers, stationed perilously close to the front lines, transmitted real-time data back to the firing batteries. Artillery officers had to adjust trajectories on the fly, a process that demanded both mathematical precision and rapid decision-making. The barrage itself involved multiple calibers of guns working in tandem. 105mm howitzers provided rapid, sustained fire, softening enemy positions and disrupting movement. Heavier 155mm guns targeted fortified bunkers and caves, capable of collapsing reinforced stone or concrete structures. Even naval artillery contributed, lobbing shells from offshore vessels with pinpoint accuracy. The coordination of these forces created a virtually unstoppable wall of destruction, a technological marvel in an age before computerized targeting systems. From the Japanese perspective, this innovation was terrifying. Many soldiers had never encountered artillery that could advance in increments, suppressing their positions systematically. The walls of fire removed any sense of safe ground and forced defenders into an almost constant state of vigilance, leaving them exhausted, disoriented, and increasingly vulnerable to follow-up infantry attacks. The brilliance of the rolling barrage lay not only in its firepower, but in its tactical application. Infantry assaults on fortified positions were historically perilous, with attackers often suffering devastating casualties from entrenched defenders. The Pacific Islands presented a particularly brutal environment. Narrow beaches, jagged terrain, and caves made frontal assaults deadly. The rolling barrage solved these problems by shaping the battlefield in real time. Artillery units advanced in carefully timed increments, maintaining constant pressure on enemy positions. Infantry followed closely behind the advancing wall of fire, shielded from defensive counterattacks. The pace was precise, too fast, and troops risked entering their own bombardment. Too slow, and defenders could recover and return fire. This synchronization required rehearsals, training, and impeccable communication between artillery crews and infantry units. Tactically, the barrage created opportunities for exploitation. Japanese forces, forced to remain in position or face annihilation, could be isolated and neutralized in sections. Concentrated fire prevented large-scale counterattacks and shattered morale before infantry even engaged directly. Observation posts tracked every movement, allowing gunners to adjust fire to gaps in the enemy line. The combination of firepower, timing, and observation transformed what might have been a static and deadly frontal assault into a methodical, controlled advance. The rolling barrage also introduced flexibility into the battlefield. When infantry units encountered unexpected resistance or terrain obstacles, artillery fire could be shifted to create new openings. This adaptability gave American commanders a decisive advantage, turning artillery into both a shield and a spear, suppressing enemy fire while enabling momentum. The result was a battle rhythm that favored coordination and precision over brute force alone. Beyond the physical devastation, the rolling artillery had profound moral and psychological implications. For Japanese soldiers, the experience was psychologically overwhelming. Men trained to withstand bombardment and fight to the last breath were confronted with a force that rendered conventional courage nearly meaningless. The destruction was indiscriminate within targeted zones. Bunkers collapsed, trenches were flattened, and soldiers were separated from comrades. The sheer scale and precision of the attack created a sense of inevitability, eroding morale before direct combat even began. American soldiers were not immune to moral reflection. While the barrage minimized their exposure and casualties, they witnessed the immense destructive power unleashed on the enemy. Shells reduced well-fortified positions to rubble in seconds, leaving behind devastation that lingered long after the assault moved forward. Commanders understood the necessity of overwhelming firepower, yet the human cost, the faces of young men caught in the path of destruction, was undeniable. This tension between military necessity and human suffering underscored every decision, every calculation, and every fired shell. The psychological impact extended to both sides of the conflict. Japanese commanders faced the challenge of maintaining discipline in the face of overwhelming technology. Many soldiers experienced shock, hesitation, and fear, even as they tried to adhere to strict orders of resistance. On the American side, the knowledge that precision artillery could decisively shape battles reinforced confidence, but also demanded accountability. The moral weight of unleashing such destructive power was ever present, a reminder that technological superiority carried with it a profound responsibility. The technological, tactical, and moral angles converged to reveal the full scope of the rolling artillery's impact. It was a weapon of precision, a methodical tactical instrument, and a psychological force all at once. It reshaped the battlefield in ways that went beyond sheer destruction, influencing human behavior, command decisions, and the moral calculations of war. These dimensions set the stage for the decisive moment, the climax/turning point, where the rolling artillery would confront Japanese defenders in full force, determining the outcome of a critical Pacific campaign. January 17th, 1944, 5:45 hours. A pale light begins to wash over the jagged ridges of Saipan, revealing the labyrinth of trenches, foxholes, and bunkers carefully prepared by Japanese defenders. The Marines and Army artillery units, concealed behind temporary embankments and camouflage positions, are ready. Spotters have relayed final coordinates. Gunners check calculations for wind, elevation, and range. Silence hangs in the air, broken only by distant engine hums and the occasional cry of seabirds. Then, without warning, the first shells scream through the sky. The initial volleys land precisely on Japanese forward positions, sending explosions that throw dirt, rocks, and smoke hundreds of feet into the air. Men huddled in trenches are thrown to the ground. Foxholes collapse, creating jagged craters where soldiers once stood. The coordinated rolling barrage begins its methodical advance, moving forward at a pace calculated to keep Japanese defenders constantly under fire while keeping American infantry just behind the lethal wall. Shock spreads instantly through the defenders. Officers attempt to maintain order, shouting commands that are swallowed by the thunderous detonations. Communication lines are severed. Runners caught in the open are obliterated before they can reach their units. Soldiers attempt to fire back, but many weapons are destroyed or rendered unusable by the relentless bombardment. The very ground seems to pulse with destructive energy, as if the earth itself were complicit in the assault. American forward observers, perched in exposed positions, track every movement. Adjustments are transmitted via radio to the artillery batteries, shifting fire to suppress pockets of resistance as they appear. The precision is extraordinary. Machine gun nests are neutralized before they can target advancing infantry. Fortified bunkers collapse with thunderous force, their occupants trapped or scattered. The rolling barrage is not random. It is surgical, crushing enemy positions in succession, leaving defenders no time to regroup. Infantry begins to advance behind the barrage, moving in disciplined waves. Marines and Army soldiers crawl through shattered terrain, using craters and debris as temporary cover. Each step is synchronized with the timing of the artillery, a careful balance between speed and caution. Troops witness the devastation firsthand. Soldiers caught in the initial blast lie motionless in craters. Earth and smoke obscure vision, forcing reliance on sound and instinct. Yet despite the horror, the methodical advance presses on, demonstrating the effectiveness of preparation, training, and coordination. By 7 o'clock hours, the rolling barrage has advanced several hundred meters, systematically neutralizing Japanese forward positions. Survivors are forced to retreat into secondary bunkers and caves, only to encounter continued shelling. The American tactic leaves no sanctuary. Japanese troops attempt counterattacks, but machine gun emplacements and snipers, already under suppressive fire, cannot respond effectively. Commanders attempt to coordinate reinforcements, but the destruction of observation posts and communication lines leaves many units isolated. The human toll is staggering. Individual acts of bravery emerge amid chaos. Soldiers dragging wounded comrades to safety, small groups mounting desperate resistance. But the relentless firepower and precision coordination make these efforts largely futile. From the perspective of Japanese infantry, it feels as though the battlefield itself has turned against them. Every ridge, trench, and cave that once offered shelter now becomes a target for destruction. Fear and disbelief ripple through the ranks, eroding the discipline that had sustained them in previous engagements. Simultaneously, the Americans witness both the efficacy and horror of the tactic. Observers note the destruction of enemy positions and the reduction of infantry casualties among advancing troops. Yet the sheer scale of devastation is undeniable. Shells displace earth in great clouds of dust and smoke, while entrenched defenders are overwhelmed by a force that is methodical unstoppable and terrifying in its precision. Commanders maintained focus, ensuring that the barrage continues to advance at the exact rate required to protect infantry without overextending and risking misfires. By mid-morning, 9 o'clock hours, the first phase of the rolling barrage has reached the heart of the Japanese defensive line. Forward trenches are obliterated. Reinforced bunkers are reduced to rubble. Observers report clusters of defenders attempting to regroup, only to be immediately suppressed by shifting artillery fire. The combination of timing, firepower, and coordination leaves the Japanese struggling to respond strategically. Retreat is often impossible, as secondary positions are already targeted. Counterattacks are ineffective, neutralized before momentum can develop. The battlefield now presents a surreal and terrifying scene. The terrain is pockmarked with craters, smoke rises in continuous columns, and the air is thick with the smell of gunpowder and burning earth. Japanese soldiers move cautiously, often hesitating under the overwhelming pressure of fire, while American infantry uses the destruction as cover, advancing systematically toward strategic objectives. The rolling artillery has not only shattered defenses, but has imposed a psychological stranglehold. The enemy's confidence and cohesion are eroding with every passing minute. In these early hours, the effectiveness of the rolling barrage becomes undeniable. It is not merely a weapon. It is a force multiplier, amplifying human effort with mechanical precision. Commanders on both sides recognize the implications. For the Americans, a path to victory that minimizes infantry losses. For the Japanese, a stark confrontation with a form of warfare that defies conventional defensive strategy. The initial shock has set the stage for decisive action, a turning point in the battle where human resolve, technological power, and tactical genius intersect with devastating effect. By late morning, 11 o'clock hours, the rolling artillery had carved a path of destruction across the Japanese defensive lines. What had been dense, fortified positions were now shattered landscapes of craters, smoke, and twisted steel. Forward observation officers reported with grim satisfaction. Every machine gun nest neutralized, every trench segment suppressed, every cave under constant threat. For American infantry, the path forward was still dangerous, but the coordinated fire had stripped the enemy of the advantage they had long relied upon. Japanese commanders attempted desperate measures. Small units tried to regroup in secondary bunkers, emerging from hidden caves to mount counterattacks or reposition machine gun teams. But the barrage adapted to their movements. Artillery fire shifted incrementally, targeting clusters of defenders as they appeared, cutting off avenues of retreat and isolating pockets of resistance. Communications, already compromised, failed entirely in many sectors. Commanders were forced to make split-second decisions under the constant roar of explosions, unable to coordinate reinforcements or call for support. The psychological toll on the Japanese soldiers was immediate and profound. Men who had been drilled to fight to the last breath now faced an unrelenting, precise force that destroyed positions faster than they could respond. Fear and confusion interwove with discipline, creating hesitation at every turn. Some soldiers attempted heroic acts, charging at artillery positions or dragging wounded comrades through shell-torn terrain, only to be cut down or suppressed by the advancing fire. Others surrendered, an almost unthinkable act under the strict codes of Japanese military honor, recognizing the futility of continued resistance. Meanwhile, American infantry exploited the advantages created by the barrage. Small units advanced behind the protective wall of fire, moving through the shattered earth and cratered trenches. Engineers followed, clearing obstacles and securing positions for heavier units to advance. Tanks provided support where terrain allowed, firing into remaining pockets of resistance and reinforcing the psychological impact of overwhelming combined arms. Each step of the infantry was calculated, deliberate, and synchronized with the continuous forward movement of artillery, maintaining pressure without exposing troops to unnecessary danger. By early afternoon, 1300 hours, the Japanese defensive network was collapsing. Forward and secondary positions had been reduced to rubble, command structures fragmented, and morale shattered. The rolling barrage had done more than destroy fortifications. It had systematically eroded the cohesion and will of the defenders. In isolated pockets, fierce resistance continued. Machine gun teams firing from half-collapsed bunkers, riflemen ambushing through shattered foliage. But these were exceptions, quickly neutralized by targeted fire. The battlefield now bore the unmistakable signs of total domination. Shell craters scarred the terrain like scars on the body of the island itself. Smoke rose in continuous columns, obscuring vision and masking the advance of infantry. Explosions continued, punctuating the eerie silence between volleys. Japanese soldiers who survived the initial onslaught were forced into defensive huddles, often trapped in positions with no viable retreat. The precision and relentlessness of the barrage had effectively dictated the tempo of battle, leaving defenders reacting rather than initiating. From the American perspective, the effectiveness of coordination between artillery and infantry was undeniable. Forward officers continued to adjust fire in real time, ensuring suppression of remaining enemy positions. The combination of mechanical precision and human observation turned the rolling artillery into an almost sentient force, relentless, adaptive, and devastating. Casualties among American infantry were significantly reduced compared to previous assaults on fortified islands, confirming the tactical advantage of the innovation. As the afternoon wore on, 1500 hours, isolated resistance collapsed entirely. The rolling barrage, having fulfilled its purpose, began to taper in intensity, giving American infantry the space to secure objectives and consolidate positions. Japanese survivors, retreating to rear positions or surrendering, faced the reality of a battlefield utterly transformed by firepower and coordination. The assault, which had begun as a calculated method of advancing the line, now stood as a decisive moment in the Pacific Campaign, demonstrating the lethal efficacy of combining precision artillery with disciplined infantry maneuver. The immediate consequences were profound. The Japanese defensive lines had been shattered, command structures were fractured, and surviving troops faced an almost insurmountable challenge in reorganizing under continuous threat. American forces had secured the first critical objectives, preserving manpower while systematically dismantling enemy positions. The rolling artillery had not merely won space on the battlefield. It had broken the psychological and tactical backbone of the defenders, showcasing a new paradigm in modern warfare. By late afternoon, 1630 hours, the battlefield lay in relative stillness. Smoke and dust hung in the air, and the sound of artillery fire had faded to distant echoes. Marines and Army units began to consolidate gains, tend to wounded, and prepare for subsequent phases of the campaign. The rolling barrage, having achieved its purpose, had set the tempo for the rest of the operation. Its success demonstrated that innovation, coordination, and discipline could transform what had once been a near-impossible assault into a methodical, controlled advance. The first phase of the battle was over, but its implications reverberated far beyond the ridges and beaches of Saipan. The Japanese defenders, stunned by the relentless efficiency of the rolling artillery, were forced to confront a new reality. The age of static defenses was coming to an end, replaced by a war of precision, coordination, and overwhelming firepower. For the Americans, the operation validated months of planning, reconnaissance, and training, proving that methodical application of technology and tactics could achieve decisive results with reduced casualties. By the evening of January 17, 1944, the first phase of the battle for Saipan had concluded, leaving the island scarred and its Japanese defenders shattered. The rolling artillery barrage had achieved its primary objective, reducing fortified positions, breaking the cohesion of enemy units, and creating clear paths for American infantry to advance with minimal casualties. Reports from forward observers confirmed that hundreds of bunkers and defensive positions had been destroyed or rendered ineffective. Machine gun nests and sniper emplacements were systematically neutralized, while cave networks that had once promised shelter to Japanese troops now lay exposed to relentless follow-up fire. The territorial gains were immediate and significant. American forces secured critical beachheads, ridgelines, and approaches to key fortifications. Engineers moved swiftly to clear debris, fortify captured positions, and establish supply lines for advancing troops. The coordination between artillery and infantry ensured that gains were not merely symbolic. They were tactically decisive. Japanese attempts to counterattack were largely ineffective. Fragmented units found themselves isolated and cut off from command. Forward reports indicated that the rolling barrage had reduced resistance along a broad front, allowing American forces to consolidate control of sectors that previously would have required costly frontal assaults. Verified reports from the U.S. Marine Corps and Army confirmed the scale of the operation. Official figures indicate that in the first hours of the barrage, dozens of Japanese defensive positions were destroyed and casualties among enemy ranks were severe. Forward observers noted that entire trenches and small bunkers were obliterated in minutes, leaving survivors disoriented and unable to organize effective resistance. At the same time, American infantry casualties were comparatively low, a testament to the tactical innovation and precise coordination of artillery with ground movements. This operational efficiency underscored the effectiveness of combining firepower with disciplined maneuver, validating months of meticulous planning and rehearsal. The impact on Japanese defensive strategy was immediate. Commanders, witnessing the destruction and disintegration of their forward positions, were forced to reconsider conventional tactics. The reliance on entrenched positions, caves, and fixed fortifications, once considered the backbone of island defense, proved insufficient against an adversary capable of sustained, precise, and mobile artillery fire. Communication breakdowns and the loss of observation posts further compounded the challenges, leaving senior officers unable to coordinate reinforcements or adapt strategy in real time. The result was a battlefield in which initiative had shifted decisively to the Americans. Beyond the tactical and territorial implications, the operation highlighted a broader evolution in warfare. The rolling artillery barrage demonstrated the potential of synchronized, multidimensional attacks to reduce enemy effectiveness without excessive infantry losses. It forced military planners on both sides to reconsider the value of traditional defenses and emphasize the importance of mobility, coordination, and technological integration. The lessons learned from Saipan would inform subsequent operations across the Pacific, influencing assaults on Tinian, Guam, and ultimately Iwo Jima, where similar tactics would be employed with devastating effect. Eyewitness accounts reinforce the transformative nature of the assault. Marines described moving through terrain previously dominated by enemy positions now reduced to rubble, noting both the effectiveness of the artillery and the eerie silence that followed the initial onslaught. Japanese survivors, when captured or later documented in post-battle reports, recalled the psychological impact of the rolling barrage, the sense of inevitability, the impossibility of finding cover, and the overwhelming force of a coordinated and adaptive assault. These testimonies illustrate not only the physical destruction, but also the profound human and operational consequences of the tactic. By the close of the day, the battlefield had been irreversibly altered. The combination of precise firepower, synchronized coordination, and disciplined infantry movement had not only secured immediate objectives, but had set a precedent for future operations. Saipan, long considered a heavily fortified bastion, now lay in American hands in significant sectors, demonstrating that methodical, technologically informed assaults could overcome even the most resilient defenses. The first phase of the aftermath also highlighted the cost of innovation in warfare. While American casualties were comparatively low, the sheer destructive force of the rolling artillery left a trail of devastation that would take days to fully assess. Japanese defensive capacity was significantly reduced, but the human toll on both sides was undeniable. The battlefield itself bore the marks of firepower, timing, and coordination, with craters, destroyed bunkers, and collapsed caves as testimony to the intensity of the engagement. As night fell, commanders on both sides were left to contemplate the implications. For the Americans, the rolling artillery had proven a decisive tool, offering both tactical advantage and operational momentum. For the Japanese, it had revealed vulnerabilities in even the most disciplined and entrenched forces, forcing a reconsideration of defensive doctrine. The immediate military consequences, the destruction of fortifications, territorial gains, and reduced enemy cohesion, would ripple through subsequent operations, shaping the remainder of the Pacific campaign. The psychological impact of the rolling artillery assault extended far beyond the physical devastation of the battlefield. Japanese soldiers, many of whom had been trained to endure bombardments and fight to the last, were now confronted with an enemy capable of precision, relentless, and adaptive fire. The sense of inevitability, the feeling that no position, no matter how well fortified, could survive, permeated the ranks. Survivors recounted the terror of watching comrades fall before their eyes, while trenches collapsed and caves were crushed by sustained bombardment. Morale eroded quickly, leaving even the most disciplined units hesitant to advance or mount counterattacks. Commanders faced unprecedented challenges in maintaining cohesion. With forward lines obliterated and communication disrupted, isolated units struggled to act in concert. Orders were frequently delayed or impossible to transmit, forcing officers to make split-second decisions with incomplete information. Many Japanese leaders recognized that the traditional reliance on entrenched positions and rigid defensive doctrine was no longer sufficient. The rolling artillery had not only inflicted casualties, but also shattered the very structure of command, leaving the defenders reactive and fragmented. On the American side, the assault validated months of careful planning, coordination, and technological investment. Infantry units, following the moving wall of artillery, advanced with fewer casualties than in previous island assaults. Commanders observed the efficacy of integrating firepower with maneuver, noting that artillery could serve not only as a destructive tool, but also as a psychological instrument, suppressing enemy initiative before direct engagement. The success of the operation encouraged the further development of precision fire tactics, reinforced the value of combined arms operations, and informed future campaigns throughout the Pacific. Strategically, the lessons of Saipan were profound. The destruction of Japanese defensive capacity revealed the limitations of static fortifications in the face of adaptive, coordinated assaults. Commanders recognized that technology, planning, and disciplined execution could decisively shape battlefield outcomes. The rolling artillery demonstrated that warfare was no longer simply a matter of courage or numbers. It required synchronization, observation, and the ability to leverage firepower with surgical precision. These principles would guide subsequent operations on Tinian, Guam, and Iwo Jima, where U.S. forces employed similar tactics with devastating results. The aftermath also revealed the human cost of innovation in warfare. Survivors of the bombardment described both awe and horror at the efficiency of the rolling barrage. The psychological strain on soldiers, fear, exhaustion, disorientation, was amplified by the unrelenting nature of the attack. Even for American troops, witnessing the destruction inflicted by their own artillery created an awareness of the moral weight of technological superiority. Every shell fired had a tangible effect on human life, forcing both officers and enlisted men to reconcile strategic necessity with the consequences of overwhelming firepower. The broader implications extended to Japanese strategy and morale across the Pacific. News of the devastation spread quickly through communications channels, reinforcing the perception that U.S. forces possessed superior coordination, firepower, and tactical innovation. Morale among Japanese troops on other islands was affected as well, as the rolling barrage demonstrated that entrenched positions could be systematically destroyed despite years of preparation and discipline. The psychological advantage gained by the Americans complemented the physical gains, further accelerating the momentum of the island-hopping campaign. By the close of the day, Saipan had been irreversibly transformed. The terrain, once dominated by Japanese fortifications and disciplined defensive formations, now bore the marks of calculated destruction. Forward positions were secured by American forces, artillery units consolidated for subsequent phases, and engineers began repairing paths and fortifications for continued advance. The combined effects of tactical precision, technological innovation, and human resilience had achieved a decisive outcome. In strategic terms, the battle illustrated a shift in modern warfare. Success depended not only on manpower and courage, but also on the ability to integrate observation, technology, and timing into coordinated operations. The rolling artillery had become more than a weapon. It was a force that shaped morale, dictated movement, and redefined the rules of engagement in the Pacific. Its legacy would inform both American operational planning and Japanese defensive responses for the remainder of the war. As night fell over the island, commanders on both sides understood the enduring lessons of the day. For the Americans, it was a proof of concept. Precise, coordinated, and adaptive firepower could neutralize even the most formidable defensive positions. For the Japanese, it was a harsh revelation. Traditional fortifications and strict discipline, while honorable, were insufficient against an opponent who had mastered synchronization, mobility, and the psychological dimensions of combat. The immediate battle was over, but its consequences would echo throughout the Pacific, shaping strategy, morale, and the nature of warfare itself. The rolling artillery barrage on Saipan marked more than a tactical triumph. It represented a turning point in the way wars were fought in the Pacific. For the Japanese defenders, trained to hold their ground with unwavering discipline, the assault revealed the limits of courage and preparation when confronted with precision, coordination, and relentless technological force. Positions once thought secure were swept away in minutes. The human cost was profound, yet the operation also showcased the effectiveness of planning, innovation, and adaptability. For the Americans, the success of the rolling barrage demonstrated that warfare had evolved beyond sheer numbers or heroic charge. Victory required the integration of technology, observation, and disciplined execution. A careful orchestration in which every shell, every calculation, and every coordinated step of the infantry contributed to the outcome. The assault validated the principle that firepower, when combined with precise timing and strategic insight, could preserve lives while achieving decisive results. Beyond strategy and tactics, the battle left a lasting imprint on the human experience of war. Soldiers on both sides faced the extremes of fear, exhaustion, and resolve. The Japanese confronted the terror of an unstoppable force, while American troops bore witness to the destructive power they wielded and the moral responsibility that accompanied it. History would remember not only the destruction of fortifications, but the psychological strain, the moral dilemmas, and the human resilience displayed in the chaos of battle. In a broader sense, the engagement underscored the relentless evolution of modern warfare. Static defenses alone could no longer guarantee security. Precision, adaptability, and coordination had become decisive. The lessons learned on Saipan would echo through subsequent campaigns, shaping both Allied and Japanese strategies and influencing the very nature of combat in the Pacific theater. Ultimately, the rolling artillery barrage stands as a testament to the convergence of human ingenuity and the unforgiving realities of war. It transformed terrain, shattered defenses, and altered the course of a campaign. Yet it also reminded history of the human cost behind every calculation, every shell, and every advance. In the end, Saipan was not merely a battlefield. It was a mirror of the evolving art of war, where technology, strategy, and human resolve intersected in a moment that would shape the Pacific War and the lessons of modern combat for generations to come.